Mother Nature gave us two groups of foods: animal foods, meat, fish, eggs, and dairy, and plants, grains, beans, vegetables, fruit, seeds, nuts, and the greenery. These two groups of foods work very differently in the human body. And we need to understand that, and the majority of people don't understand that. So let's understand it. When it comes to basic sciences, the fact is that has been discovered in the 1930s, the only creatures on our planet that can digest plant matter are microbes. Nothing else can digest plants, only microbes, balanced microbial communities. Mother Nature used this scientific fact in creating a digestive system of a cow, or a goat, or a giraffe, or a deer, or another herbivorous animal. Mother Nature gave them several stomachs, enormous stomachs, full of microbes. A cow has 3 enormous stomachs, and this group of stomachs is called rumen in her. So the cow doesn't digest the grass herself. It's that microbial community in her rumen that does this work for her. It breaks down the hard-to-digest substances in the plants into something that the cow's body can benefit from. We human beings don't have a rumen. We have one small stomach. And our stomach, if it is healthy, produces hydrochloric acid. The acidity in your stomach can go below 2, below 1 pH when we're hungry. Very hostile environment for any microbe to survive in. That is why a human stomach should be, a healthy human stomach, should be practically sterile. Only very few microbes are hanging around there and surviving in a human stomach. Remember, only microbes can digest plant matter. That makes, because your stomach, healthy human stomach, is practically microbe-free, that means that plants are indigestible for a human digestive system, for the human stomach. But hydrochloric acid, pepsin, and other elements of a human stomach juice are ideal, perfect, to digest meat, fish, eggs, and dairy. Animal foods. These foods are easy for us to digest. They get broken down nicely in the stomach, and then that whole mixture gets passed out into several meters of intestines, where the digestive process gets completed, and these foods then absorb. And the only things that can absorb are things which have digested properly, got broken down properly. And that is, again, only animal foods: meat, fish, eggs, and dairy. Plants sit in the human stomach doing not much because they're indigestible. Then they go through the intestines, they contribute some juices, some minerals, a few vitamins, and a few cofactors. But the bulk of what the human body is made from, plants cannot contribute. And what is that bulk? The physical structure of your body. It's water, first of all. By weight, it's 70% water. By molecular count, it's 90% water, the human body. When we take water out of your body, what's left, the dry weight, is about 50-50, protein and fat. When we analyze human protein and human fat in a laboratory, we find that they are practically identical to protein and fat that we find in animal foods, in meat, fish, eggs, and dairy. Plants have lots of proteins. The most researched one is gluten, and lots of fats. But in their biochemical structure, they are completely inappropriate for building human protein and human fat. On top of that, they're indigestible. And I say the most researched protein in plants is gluten, and the more we research gluten, the more we realize that, and certainly scientists who specialize in researching gluten are completely convinced that gluten damages everybody, whether the person is aware of it or not. Nobody can really digest it, and nobody can really survive it that well. So, plants are indigestible. They have wrong protein for the human body. They have wrong fats. They have polyunsaturated fats largely. We need a tiny amount of these polyunsaturated fatty acids for the human body. But the bulk of what the human body needs in terms of fats are animal fats. And the proportions of the various fatty acids in lamb fat and beef fat and pork fat and goose fat and duck fat and butter and fish oils are correct for building the human fat. And 50% of your dry weight is fat. Fat is not surplus to requirement. Your heart is sitting in a great big chamber of thick fat, and it's a fully saturated fat, and it is its source of energy. The heart muscle uses exclusively fat for energy, and it sits in its own store. The same with kidneys. Kidneys sit in a thick chamber made out of hard fat, and that's their energy store. And the adrenals are sitting in there as well, just above the kidney, and that's their energy store. There are only 4 cells in the human body that require glucose for energy. All other cells thrive on fats and prefer fats as a source of energy. And these fats are not vegetable oils. This is not olive oil. This is not sesame oil or any other oil. It's animal fats. So animal foods are easy for human digestive system, human stomach to digest. They absorb well. They provide correct proteins for building your protein. They provide correct fats for building your fat in your body. So the animal foods are the feeding, building foods for human bodies. Only animal foods feed us and maintain our physical structure. And you have to understand that every cell in the human body has a short life. It works very hard, it gets old, it gets worn out, it dies, it gets removed, and a new baby cell is born to replace it. So your body constantly gives birth to trillions of new baby cells. In order to do that, to maintain its physical structure, to rejuvenate, to heal any damage. So in order to produce billions and trillions of cells on a daily basis, building materials are required. These cells need to be made out of something. 70% water, 50-50 protein and fat. Only animal foods can maintain the physical structure and heal any damage in your body. So why do we eat plants at all? Plants do not feed us. They're indigestible. They have the wrong protein, the wrong fats. On top of that, plants, practically all plants, contain chemicals which are called anti-nutrients. There's a lot of research in this area, and the research continues. We're discovering new things all the time. And the most well-known ones are lectins, enzyme inhibitors, phthalates, salicylates, phenols, and other chemicals. These chemicals are particularly present in the seeds of plants. Because a seed of a plant is its baby. The plant can't run away. You see, plant is rooted in one place. It can't run away from a predator. And it wants its babies to grow. Plants don't want their babies to be eaten by animals. So they equip their babies with lots and lots of anti-nutrients, which damage the physical structure of a body of an animal that eats them. That is why, my cows taught me this lesson. If the pasture goes, if the grass is on the pasture go to seed, my cows refuse to eat it. They just give you this dirty look and they say, point with their nose, what's this? I'm not eating this. Because they know that the seed of cereal grasses will make them ill, will cause a problem in the rumen. So, seeds. So what are grains that everybody's eating? Wheat, rice, maize, barley, all the other grains that people eat. Those are seeds. What are beans and lentils? Seeds. What are peas? Seeds. What are nuts? Seeds. They're all equipped with these anti-nutrients. So the question again is, why do we eat plants at all, human beings? If it doesn't feed, if they're indigestible and they designed to poison us and make us ill, and they don't feed the human body, so why are we eating them at all? Because plants are cleansers. They provide cleansing substances, they provide some cofactors. They don't feed your body, they don't build your body, and they go through most of your digestive system without being digested properly. And then eventually they land in your large intestine, in the bowel. And that is where the majority of the gut flora lives. That's where that is the equivalent of a cow's rumen in the human body. And what happens there in the bowel is similar to what happens in the rumen of a cow. So that microbial community then works on the plants, works on starch, works on fiber and on other substances, and produces some useful substances for us. But the difference between a cow and a human being is that in a cow, her rumen is at the beginning of her digestive system, before absorption of food happens. While in the human being, our rumen is at the end, too late. All the absorption of food has already happened higher up there. That is why plants do not feed human beings. And my clinical experience has confirmed this to me. Some years ago, now probably 10 years now, probably even more, I was contacted by a group of mothers who had babies, exclusively breastfed babies, a few weeks old, vomiting diarrhea. The child is losing weight, not developing, not growing, not gaining weight. Babies are supposed to gain weight quite rapidly every day. Those babies were losing weight. Doctors do testing. They find that the child is allergic to all protein on the planet. These children receive the diagnosis of FPIES, food protein-induced enterocolitis syndrome. That was a new diagnosis at that time. Nobody knew what it was. And what the doctors could suggest to these parents is that to stop breastfeeding, not give the child any protein, and put the child on an elemental formula made out of amino acids. And the original source of this formula is soya. That was a soy formula, soy-based formula. So, and these children, if they follow that protocol, develop profound physical and mental disabilities, and many of them didn't survive. They died. So, at that stage in my work, my GAPS work, my experience, my clinical experience, I knew that the more the digestive system of a person, of a human being, is damaged, the less that person can digest plants. Less plant matter they can tolerate, and the less plants they should be eating. So we try to put these babies on the first stage of the GAPS introduction diet, which is the gentlest, where we remove all the most damaging and the most difficult to digest substances out of the diet, and we only eat very gentle, very healing, very soothing foods. But even that stage wasn't gentle enough for these babies. So the next step for me was to remove all plant matter. We've done that. The babies were put on meat stock, which were made at home, on fermented milk with kefir grains at home, on raw egg yolks, on fish stock, and we started getting results. Vomiting stopped, diarrhea stopped, children started gaining weight, started growing, started developing. And then it went on and on and on. Unfortunately, the mothers already stopped breastfeeding. The real benefits came when the parents were able to stop the formula that the doctors put them on. The soy formula, this elemental formula. All of these children were allergic and they were reacting to this formula. So that's when the real growth and the real healing started. And then these children went on and they developed beautifully and without any disabilities, mental and physical. But what we found extremely difficult with these children, introduction of plant matter. The tiniest amount of peeled, deseeded, and well-cooked and blended courgette would bring diarrhea back, vomiting back, or any other vegetable. Because starchy vegetables not allowed in the GAPS diet. We have no starch. We avoid all starchy things. So we just take the gentlest vegetables. And it took us 4, 5, 6 years with some children to introduce the tiniest amount of fermented carrot, courgette, and onion. First, we ferment it for a few months. And what does fermentation do? We ask microbes to pre-digest that vegetable for us in a jar or in a pot before we actually put it in the mouth of a child, before we consume it. And then we would ferment these vegetables. The microbes pre-digest them. They break down all the anti-nutrients. They break down fiber. They make the whole mixture much easier for human beings to digest. And then we would cook that fermented vegetable, and then we would blend it in microscopic amounts. And that's how we managed to introduce some vegetables into the diet of these children. But in the meantime, while we were trying all of that, they were entirely on a no-plant GAPS diet. That's how the no-plant GAPS diet appeared and was developed altogether. They were entirely living without eating plants at all for 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. They've recovered from all their health problems, rosy cheeks, bushy tail, bright, beautiful children in every possible way, thriving at school, good social skills, physically healthy and well, playing sports and everything else. So it's these children that demonstrated to me without a shadow of a doubt that human beings can live perfectly well without eating plants at all.
So, given everything you shared there, plants are toxic on a number of levels. You shared this example with the babies. Why introduce plants at all? You mentioned the cleansing. I just want to understand how that fits in. It sounds like somebody would have to be at a certain level of health before they did that. But if they are healthy and they're thriving on only animal foods, is that cleansing piece actually necessary?
No, not at all. We now have a carnivore movement in the world, and people recover from the most severe autoimmune illnesses and neurodegenerative illnesses and hormonal illnesses, all kinds of illnesses. And I've met many of these people in carnivore movement. So they make a conscious choice not to eat plant matter at all. And they're thriving. They're very healthy, happy, these people, and they're doing very well. They don't want to introduce it. But many people do, because plants are nice. They give us colors, flavors, fun, tastes. So people would like them. People would like to have them. So if your digestive system is strong enough to handle some plant matter, then why not? Why not have this fun? Why not have these colors and flavors and nice things to add to the meat and the fish and the eggs and the dairy? But the bulk of what any human being consumes on a daily basis should be animal foods. Or we can live entirely on animal foods without eating plants at all. And the further north you go, the colder the climate where people live, the less plant matter they need, the more they can thrive, the more meat and fat they need to cope with the cold temperatures and to thrive in that kind of environment. The further south we go, the more tropical we get, the more people can get away with less feeding and more cleansing, which means they can eat more plants and eat less of animal foods. And such cultures exist in India. I've written a book called Vegetarianism Explained, which I can show. It's right here, this book. This book explains everything to do about this dichotomy between animal foods and the plant foods. It explains why vegetarianism and veganism are not a good idea for the vast majority of humanity. So when I was writing that book, when I was working with that concept, I went to India several times, and I studied Indian, because people in the West all point to India, say, oh, they're all vegan and vegetarian and they're all right, kind of thing. So I went and studied it properly. And what I discovered, that traditional vegetarianism in India comes from poverty. It is not a choice. These people can't afford meat. And if they've grown an animal, they sell this animal to somebody wealthier, and the amount of money that they get is enough for them to buy enough rice and beans for the whole family for the whole year. So they can't afford to eat that animal themselves. But if they have a chance to eat meat or fish, they'll never say no. And they all, why do you think a cow is a sacred animal in India for these families? Because she provides them with an animal food, with milk, cheese, cream, butter, ghee, an animal food that can sustain the physical structure of a human body. That is why a cow is a sacred animal in India and has been for thousands and thousands of years. All these people, these poor families who are vegetarians, they all have ducks and chickens, and they put every egg that they can get goes into that rice and goes with those beans. So that's another animal food that can sustain a human body. And I say, whenever they get a chance to eat fish and meat, they never say no. All the Indian people who live along waterways, rivers, lakes, sea, oceans, the most important piece of food on their plate is fish. Another animal food that sustains the physical structure of the human body. Western-style veganism has arrived into India with the books of Nathan Pritikhin. That was a New Yorker, a New York Jew, who in the 1930s and 40s wrote these unbelievably successful books. I'm suspicious why they were so successful. There was some interests behind who pushed this on the population of the world. And It's with those books that the veganism, Western-style veganism arrived to India, and some of them have succumbed to it. But Indians are the kind of people that take life, not so seriously, so that they do cheat. They do cheat on it. And an interesting fact that I've discovered in India, I was on an excursion and the guide was explaining something to us, and then she pointed to this group of people dressed up in particular clothes. And they said, oh, look, this is a group of Hindu pilgrims traveling across the country to their sacred sites. And part of their pilgrimage is a 41, 42-day fast. I immediately asked what kind of fast. She didn't know. So next day, I was fortunate enough to meet a group of people like that sitting on the beach. And I spoke to them. And I've asked them, I said, I understand that part of your pilgrimage is a fast, 41, 42-day fast. What kind of fast is this? Are you allowed to eat something, or do you just drink water? And they said, oh, it's very hard, very difficult, this fast, very difficult. And I said, so what is it? And they said, well, we only allowed to eat, listen to this, rice, beans, fruit, vegetables, nuts, vegetable oils, and bread. And I thought, that's the Western style veganism, vegan diet. These people for centuries, for thousands of years, considered it to be a fast, not a diet. And they would only do it for 41, 42 days, and only as part of their Hindu pilgrimage, their religious pilgrimage. And then later on, when I've researched the values of food, I've realized that indeed veganism is not a diet, it is a fast. You provide a lot of cleansing for your body with all this plant matter that you're eating, but you're not feeding your body to any degree. Fasting can be very healing, very beneficial for human health, particularly for a person who is very toxic and overweight, maybe. So these people in the first few weeks of fasting on a vegan regimen start feeling better, because a cleaner body feels better than a toxic one. But then at a certain point, the body finishes cleansing, and it becomes hungry, and it asks to be fed. And the way the body asks to be fed, it gives you a desire for a roast chicken, for eggs and bacon, for fish, for cream, for cheese, for something like that. Trouble is, in the West, many vegans follow this regimen for political reasons, religious reasons, emotional reasons, various other reasons. They don't listen to their body. They force it to continue cleansing when the body is asking to be fed. And at that point, the body has no choice but to start cannibalizing itself, to start dismantling muscle and bone in order to feed the brain, the heart, the lungs, the liver, and other vital organs. The body goes into a survival mode. And I have seen enough vegans in my clinic. I have worked with many, many vegans and vegetarians whose muscle loss and bone loss are catastrophic. Connective tissue loss, absolutely catastrophic. So in effect, these people are eating meat. They are carnivorous. They're just not obtaining the meat from outside their bodies. They're eating their own meat in order to survive, in order for the vital organs to continue ticking on. But what happens with them? Their brain shrinks, and that's been now confirmed with MRI scans. Literally, the brain matter shrinks. That is why these people become hangry. It's now a clinical term made out of two words, angry and hungry. Because the brain is starving, these people become revolutionaries. They are intolerant, they're very critical, they berate everybody who eats meat, and they become evangelical about it. And sense of humor disappears, and cognitive ability reduces, and critical thinking reduces in these people. They don't perceive the state their body's in. They don't realize how far they've gone, how they're destroying their body. They think they're perfectly healthy, and they think they're feeling perfectly well. So veganism is not a diet, it is a form of fasting. And people need to understand that, and that's what I explain in this book, Vegetarianism Explained. So we need to understand the value of animal foods and the value of plants.
Coming back to the babies there, I jumped in with a follow-up question, but I want to make sure you finish that story. What led to the no plant version of the GAPS diet.
Absolutely. Now these babies are teenagers, healthy, beautiful children, and many of them still have a very limited number of vegetables that they can tolerate. Majority of them can never tolerate fruit or nuts or anything else. They just can tolerate a few vegetables. But the bulk of what they consume are animal foods. And then I started using this no plant GAPS diet with patients with Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, severe mental illnesses. And now I have many people who have been on a no plant GAPS diet for many years. They are thriving and they have no intentions of introducing plants. So these people demonstrate to all of us, without a shadow of a doubt, that human beings do not need to eat plants. We don't need 5 a day, or 7 a day, or 15 a day, or whatever the latest figure is from our authorities. We don't need any of it. We don't need colors. We don't need rainbow colors. We don't need all of that. Because the animal foods provide everything we need, everything the human beings need. And indeed, the researcher Wesley Price, who traveled all around the world in the 1930s, and at that time, there were still quite a few indigenous cultures on our planet who were not touched by the Western corrupting civilization, who still lived on their authentic indigenous diets. And Wesley Price found that they were all very, very healthy. They didn't have any of the diseases of our modern civilization. And when he went north, he studied, when he went to Greenland, he went to the north of Canada, and he studied local people there. They live practically on meat and fat. Blubber is the major source of energy, and of course the winter there is very long. It can be 7-8 months a year, the winter, or longer. And there are no plants for them to eat, apart from a bit of seaweed that they can perhaps get out of the sea. That's what they can ferment and eat. But the rest of it was all meat and fish and fat. And if they had some dairy, maybe, but only animal foods. But the further south you go, the further particularly into tropics, where there are fruit available, people ate more plant matter. But even then in Africa, he found tribes such as Maasai and Samburu, where the women in the tribe grew some winter squashes, such as butternut squash. So they ate those kind of plants and they ate some fruit. While the men, particularly the warriors, lived entirely on animal foods. When he asked them, with this fruit growing around, why don't you eat fruit? And they said, no, that's a food for the cows. We don't eat fruit. So they lived entirely on meat, on fat, on fermented milk that they got, and they drank raw blood from their bulls. They would get some blood from the bulls. And that's what they thrived on. And these were some of the most healthy people that Wesley Price has found. And then he was particularly interested in trying to find healthy vegetarian cultures. So he was specifically looking for those people because that was 1930s, when Nathan Pretichin's books were booming all over America. And talking about Nathan Pretichin, he pushed himself, being a vegan for many years, and then he developed 3 forms of leukemia at once. And despite all the doctors telling him, you must start eating animal foods, you can't heal from this cancer, he refused, and he struggled, and eventually he died from this leukemia, from these cancers. And that's what I've observed as well with long-term vegans. They eventually develop neurodegenerative diseases, immune system collapses, and many finish up with the cancer. Because the body's starving. They put themselves into starvation. So what Wesley Price, coming back to Wesley Price, what he found on these islands, and one particular island he describes, which is fascinating. This island had 2 groups of people. There was a great big mountain. The whole island was a great big mountain. And there were people who lived high up on that mountain. That was one tribe of people. And then there were people who lived along the seashore. So people who lived along the seashore fished. They went on their boats and they caught fish. So they were healthy, happy, thriving, beautiful people. But the people who lived in the mountains would come down very often and trade fish for fruit that they could collect in the jungle up there. And Wesley Price interviewed a fisherman on the coast in one of the villages who was in hiding. And what this fisherman has explained, he said that when these people who live up there don't get enough fish, they become so angry and so aggressive. They run down to the villages and they grab people and they eat them. They're cannibals. They become cannibals. So Wesley Price basically explained the cannibalism, where cannibalism comes from. When people get severely deficient and truly hungry, and the true hunger can only be for animal foods, when the body is truly starving. These people targeted fishermen in particular because fishermen ate more fish than anybody else in the coast, and they considered their bodies to be particularly nourishing. So this fisherman was in hiding because he said, I've been told that they're looking for me. Those people from up there in the mountain. So that is where cannibalism comes from, the true cannibalism. And then there is research on Easter Island, for example, and other islands around the world where people were researching something very different. They were looking at soils and how soils got destroyed on our planet through arable agriculture. And what happened on Easter Island and on some Scottish islands and Ireland, the country of Ireland and Iceland, the same thing has happened. All of these islands, thousands of years ago, were covered by a thick forest from coast to coast. And the trees on those islands, with their roots, held the soil in place. They didn't let the soil to be washed away with the rains into the sea. Then humanity, who has developed arable agriculture, when humans started growing cereal grasses, they started chopping trees down, creating fields that they would till and grow these cereal grasses on. And when they would do that, particularly when humans dig and till, they destroy the structure of the soil, because healthy soil is highly structured. It's like a sponge. It's got a structure inside it. When every time you stick a spade into that soil, you lift a piece of soil, you break it, you've broken the whole structure. The soil, the divine skin of our planet, soil, turns into a pile of dirt, basically. It turns into dust, it turns into dirt. And then the rains wash it away off the hills into the sea. So after several hundred years of arable agriculture, when people would destroy field after field, they would clear a field of forest, they would burn the forest, usually they would burn it, and then grow these crops, and for a few years the harvest will be good, and then the soil gets destroyed and gets washed away into the sea. They finish up with a field of stones, rocks basically, with very little soil left on it. So they'll clear another patch of forest, and then another patch of forest. And this went on for hundreds of years until the whole island was cleared and lost its soil. And at that point, people will start starving. And what they've discovered, these researchers on the Easter Islands, that because the Easter Island is so isolated, it's so far away from any other inhabited parts of the planet, people became cannibals. They resorted to cannibalism because they had no other food, basically. On islands where the same scenario happened, people would go, if there are other islands or other lands nearby, they would go and then they buy food elsewhere, and they will bring the food to the island. So they didn't have to resort to cannibalism. So that explained the cannibalism. And that led to another avenue that I would like to open up. And that is why humanity is eating cereal grasses. You know that majority of plant matter on the dry part of our planet, our whole planet now, are 4 plants. 4 plants that dominate the whole plant kingdom on our planet. And these are wheat, barley, rice, and maize. 4 cereal grasses. Seeds. Remember we talked about seeds? Plants equip their seed. The seeds are their babies. They equip them with anti-nutrients, with poisonous chemicals which damage the human body, damage your digestive system, your connective tissue. You get arthritis, you get migraines, you get mental illness, you get all kinds of problems in the body simply by eating seeds of plants. So looking at the indigenous cultures of pre-agricultural era, and the best examples we have, which we have a lot of information on, are Australian Aboriginals and North American native people, North American Indians, who were pre-agricultural people. They didn't do agriculture. They didn't plow, they didn't grow any grains, they didn't do anything like that. They were hunter-gatherers. How they lived, these people? And we have enough information because thankfully the first Europeans who moved to Australia and who moved to the North America, they kept diaries. It was kind of a thing to do in those days. And a lot of those diaries have survived. And now wonderful books, these diaries have been researched and wonderful books have been written. And one of the best books I would recommend for people to read is called The Dark Emu, about Australian Aboriginals. And what this book describes, and I have some other books on American Indians as well, that these people considered the whole environment, the forest, the grasslands, the animals, the birds, the insects, the microbes, the soil, part of their family. They did not put themselves aside from nature. Whatever they did, they looked after the whole family. They looked after the forest, after the grasslands, after the animals, after the birds, after the rivers, after the lakes. And that way they understood that they will be taken care of. And indeed, they were taken care of in the most beautiful way. These people had no boundaries, no borders, no countries, no, private property as such, that this is my land and that is your land or kind of, no. These people looked after the whole continent. And they knew how to look after. They did controlled burning in the forest to prevent forest fires. We now have horrendous forest fires in Australia and in America simply because nobody's looking after the forests. Nobody's burning the underbrush, the dry wood that falls down on the ground. Nobody's burning that out in a controlled way. And what Aboriginals did, they developed ways of burning grasses around their villages in such a way that the grass grows and becomes very lush. And they've landscaped the whole continent of Australia. When they were looking after Australia wasn't a desert. It was a lush grasslands and forests. The whole continent, even in the middle of Australia. Because they knew how to plant. They would plant trees higher up on the hills while keeping the slopes and the lower parts to the grasslands. If you leave it to nature, this has been observed and researched, trees usually grow at the lower parts of the hills, while the tops of the hills are left bare as a result. No, these people did the opposite, because they knew that if you plant trees higher up on the hills, the roots of those trees will hold the soil in place. Then those tops of the hills will not be bare, will not be stripped of the soil, and that will then hold that soil, and then the grasslands below will keep their soil as well. And they use controlled burning for creating lush grasslands all around their villages. As a result, large herds of kangaroo and emu would come and graze on those grasslands. And they would take one animal silently, using a spear or using a bow and arrow. So that animal would fall, and the rest of the animals don't get scared. They don't even notice. So these people will just walk right into the middle of a herd, pick up that dead animal, bring it home and eat it and consume it, while the herds continued grazing. So they didn't have to spend a lot of effort and time hunting and running around. They would just take one animal when they need one. They created fish traps in their rivers and lakes, and in such a clever and ingenious way that it didn't alter the route of the river, it didn't change the spawning, it didn't damage the fish in any possible way, but these traps would always have fish in it. So they didn't have to spend time fishing. They will just walk into the trap and pick up the fish. So as a result, these people were healthy, happy, very well fed, and they had plenty of free time. They would sing songs and dance and play sports. They had sports games and have festivals and do art, these people. They lived a beautiful life, these people, and they had a very different spirituality, these people. And then, of course, the Europeans came and destroyed these cultures. And one interesting episode that I remember I've read in one book is the first Americans who moved west with the Great Depression came to a village in California, came to a village of indigenous people on a bank of a river. And he could see the village, it was a father with two children. One was an older boy and another one is a 3-year-old. And they could see the village on the other side. And they were hungry, they were tired, and the father sort of erected a little hut or something for them to sleep in. And he tried to hunt. He tried to kill a deer with his gun. And Next morning, he couldn't kill one, so they went to sleep. And next morning, when they woke up, there was a deer lying on their doorstep, freshly killed. And every day they would have a deer lying on their doorstep, brought by the Indians from the other side of the river. And initially he just thought how kind these people are, well, how nice. And later on, when they learned their language and they understood, the Indians did that. So he doesn't make noise with his stupid gun. Because they hunt silently. He was scaring their game away. That's why they decided that it's a good idea to feed these Europeans who don't understand, who are like children and don't understand how nature works or how the world works, and make noise with their European guns. And there are some fascinating accounts. And the 3-year-old boy finished up living with these Indians because the father went off with the older boy to earn some money somewhere, and he left the boy with these Indians. And this boy grew up with them, learned their culture, and he then dictated all of his experience to a writer who wrote a wonderful book about how these people lived. So my question is, if you are well-fed, well-nourished, healthy, happy, you live in a happy environment, in a paradise, you have plenty of free time, you're doing art, you're singing songs, you're playing sports and so on, why would you go around grasslands and eat seeds of cereal grasses?
I'm with you. I don't see a reason.
Exactly. They don't taste good. Have you tried to chew seed of grasses? Or even, wheat that you've just picked out of an ear? Or barley or oats or anything like that? They don't taste good. They're absolutely ghastly. So why would human beings do that? Why would they go around meadows collecting thousands of years these seeds, eating them? And then why would they uproot trees, clear a patch of forest to plant these seeds? I remember we tried once to scatter some rye seed as a ground cover, in our garden. Blackbirds and pigeons just followed us, picking up every seed immediately. It was a complete waste of effort, complete waste of time. So if you wanted to plant these seeds, you had to protect it from birds. And then as the seeds start to germinate, you have to protect them from rabbits and deer and other animals that would come and gladly eat all of that crop. So for the whole season, it was the job of children in history to burn fires around these wheat fields, sleep there, live there 24 hours a day, and chase away the rabbits and the deer and the birds, to protect the crop for the whole growing season. And then you have to harvest it, which by hand, which is very hard work. And then you have to separate the chaff from the grain, which is very hard work too. And then you have to find a way of storing that grain so rats and insects and people don't steal it. And then you have to do the daily grind, where you have to grind 2 stones against each other with that grain in between to make flour. And then you have to make the dough and bake a loaf of bread. All that work for a loaf of bread. For a person who's not hungry, who's got plenty of other things to do. Why would humanity start growing cereal grasses? What happened thousands of years ago? Today we have an answer to this question. They're addictive. Wheat is highly addictive. Oats are highly addictive. Barley, rice, maize, highly addictive. Then there's sugar, which is even more addictive. Then there are potatoes, which are even more addictive. The whole humanity got addicted to these plants. And they behaved like any real addict, real drug addict. If a drug addict, if you give money to a drug addict or an alcoholic, he might have not had a decent meal for weeks, but he's not going to buy food with that money. He's going to go and get the drug or get the alcohol. Such is the nature of addiction. Humanity got addicted. Somebody possibly tried it, got addicted, and then lured others to try it, and that's how it built up. And then humanity spent thousands and thousands of years perfecting their ability to produce their drug, cereal grasses. And then the British, of course, addicted the whole humanity to sugar. It was the British, their achievement. And then the potatoes came in after that. The whole humanity is a drug addict. When humanity has discovered crude oil and learned how to use it and started building big machines and started producing petrol and diesel and to drive these machines, now humanity has perfected production of colossal amounts of their drug: wheat, barley, rice, maize, potatoes, and sugarcane and sugar beet. The whole humanity is a drug addict. Add to that glyphosate and antibiotics. When the gut flora of a person gets damaged, and when the gut flora gets damaged, then fungi proliferate in the digestive tract and everywhere else in the human body. The person gets a fungal infection. And what do fungi do with wheat, rice, maize, barley, potatoes, and sugar? They have a process called alcoholic fermentation. They convert these things into alcohol. So the person, and it's been described, researched, it's called an auto-brewery syndrome. We now have a large amount of scientific data to show that this is a reality. So these people are not only become addicted to the drugs from these plants, they become alcoholics, low-grade alcoholics. Small children, tiny children become alcoholics. Toddlers become alcoholics. How does this addiction work? I've described the auto-brewery syndrome, but let's talk about the wheat and rice and maize and barley. When you feed your gut flora with these grains, the gut flora converts it into many, many different chemicals, but part of these chemicals it makes in a form of endorphins and morphines, which absorb, get into your brain, and turn the brain into a drug addict. So the brain wants more. So the brain starts dictating to me, oh, I don't want proper meals. I want pasta. I want croissants. I want baguettes. I want cakes. I want biscuits. I want soft drinks. I want breakfast cereal. I want sweets. I want French fries. The whole humanity is a drug addict and an alcoholic, to boot. Humanity is now destroying the planet through growing its drugs, because the most destructive activity of humanity on this planet is arable agriculture.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch the full episode. I'll see you over there.
The human body is a microbial community, and because food is the most powerful influence on any microbial community, then food becomes the most powerful medicine for the human body. And GAP's nutritional protocol is designed to bring